Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Summer is here. This next article is about Freud, Sigmund Freud. Everybody knows about him. Um, and, but a lot of people don't know uh, what he used to do before he became as famous as he is today. Where everybody knows about the uh, slip of the tongue and the all kinds of things from his perspective. Um, the before that, for about 10 years before all of that started, he was a neurologist and a what turned out to be a aphasiologist, right? He did a lot of work with the brain and aphasia, which is always pretty amazing. So a lot of people, and of course he was an Australian person, Austrian person, um, and got out of there before Hitler came, um, and the war started. Second World War started. Sorry about the camera here. Um, but a lot of people have been asking me where it is that I found out all this information, not just about Freud, but all of these 24 scientists that I've been working on. Um, I've worked on a lot more than that, but I told myself I would do 20. I thought I'd do 20 scientists. I ended up with about 30. I'm going to pare that back to 24 and get it done by the end of the year. I have a lot more work to do for next year. So I'm not going to do any more about the scientists, although I will continue to talk about them, but I'll be changing my work such that I'm doing these, you know, 2, 3, sometimes 4 articles a month. It takes a lot more work to get all the work done. But anyway, people have been asking me how it is that I came to understand all of this information. Me being just reminding you people that I did not know anything about the brain before. I was an engineer, then in business, and then in education. And it wasn't until my first stroke, now almost 12 years ago, 2011, that I ended up, I could not read, write, or speak well and had aphasia. And as I got better, I started to study how the brain works. And I was looking for how the scientists were the people that now can explain more to us about the brain. But of course, I still couldn't read. So I started buying books that titles I could read, and then I would start reading the table of contents. Again, the problem was that I couldn't read, but I was beginning to understand that there was a problem, not because of the words that I knew, but the way the brain works when it's damaged, and I couldn't quote read, even though if I put the individual words that were filtered out, so you could only see one word, I could understand that, and sometimes 2 words, and I could understand that, sometimes 3, but by the time it got to 4 or more, I could not read them anymore. It got foggy, and that's how I began to understand how all that was working with the brain. But I did start by buying books that included Freud, that that allowed me to see the title. I knew what that meant, and then reading their table of contents, and then getting to the index at the back, and then started to reading more paragraphs with the angst that comes with that, because when reading something that you couldn't read, it's very difficult, if not just painful, mentally painful, because you're reading it and it just doesn't make sense. So the people have been asking me how it is that I came to understand this. Well, that's how. Back then, I had the time to start buying those books as I was looking online, looking for aphasia, right? There aren't any books other than mine, the ABCs of aphasia. There aren't any books that allows you to understand a lot more all in one little book. So I would online, I put in aphasia, and I get all kinds of information and start looking at it, finding it out, printing them actually, printing out the Wikipedia articles, and then again, reading the title, reading maybe sometimes there's a summary, but then became more difficult, but at least I started printing them. Well, one of those days, while putting in aphasia, I came across aphasia and Freud, and then finding out that his first book, Freud's first book, was a book called On Aphasia. And I'm sorry, I don't have it here. I'm going to go get it. So I know. Yes, you see lots of books behind me. This is it. Freud wrote this book. It was his first book. And it turns out that back then, he had met lots of other people. He was studying their work. Hoyland Jackson, you might have heard about him earlier in my work. They knew each other and they studied each other's work. And as Freud wrote about on aphasia, I just assumed that all the people in the stroke world and the speech language world knew about Freud. However, as I was making my presentations, and I would tell them, oh, this is so interesting. All of us should understand a lot more about aphasia, not just because that's what it is, but how is it that we become who we are, and how is it that we get better, and how is it that the scientists had figured out how the brain is when it's damaged and how it recovers. So finding out that as on aphasia, it turns out that a lot of these scientists have all written their own book. And in fact, they all use the word on aphasia, believe it or not. But as I made my presentations around the country over the last several years, I would always ask the SLPs, the speech language pathologies, if they knew about on aphasia. And for the most part, they'd say, nope, never heard of that before. Well, that is how I came to understand this, because you get one book and then you have to really look at the references to see where they got it from, who wrote the foreword of lots of things, study who they are, because obviously they had a lot of information and a relationship with the author themselves, and started finding out more and more and more about how the brain works based on the work that they have all done as they all come together. Again, typically in the 1800s and into the 1900s, and obviously even today in the 20 and 21 centuries. So it is very, very interesting. And in the case with Freud, since everybody knows about him in his current understanding, very few people know about Freud from before, including that particular book called On Aphasia. And then he ended up in Vienna, and he stayed there for 50 years doing all of the work that moved from what he had done as a scientist and the brain into his work before the war, before World War II, and his work on psychoanalysis and humans. So that is it for today. I mean, Freud being who he is, everybody knows that. But for 10 years, 11 years, actually, before he moved in that direction on psychoanalysis, he did a lot of work with the brain as a neurologist and ended up writing on aphasia, and was one of the earliest aphasiologist person in our world. And apparently, as you see from my article, his work, as they said here, from another set of scientists, just referring to Freud's work at the very beginning, because it was almost completely obscured. Nobody really knew that he had done that work, that kind of work. And in fact, when he wrote this book, it says here, his first book, and it was written in 1891. Well, 1890 is when William James wrote his big tome called Principles of Psychologist, and that was in 1890. So it's all about the same time. But he wrote this book, believe it or not, his first year, they sold 142 copies. And for the next 9 years, only 115 of that this book have been were published back then, were bought back then. So very, very few. And even today makes it more difficult, although now it's on Amazon, you can find it. But a lot of people just don't know that there are a lot of very talented people who learn any number of things and move in one direction or another. And then people are really don't even know what they had done before. Like, you don't know what I used to do before. Now I do what I do about stroke and aphasia, not knowing what I used to do. And people end up in the future, they'll look at my work and say, well, this guy, that's all he does is stroke and aphasia, not realizing how any number of us did prior to. So again, thank you very much. Nice to see everyone. 2 weeks from now, there'll be another article coming out, and we'll be pushing hard to get ready for the fall and get to December and be done in this particular series. Nice to see everyone. Talk to you soon. Have a good summer so far. Take care. Bye-bye.